Hello and welcome to Broadcast Focus. My name is Russell Trafford-Jones and thanks for joining me. On this show, we talk to the people behind the media and entertainment industry. And today I'm joined by Ren Wood and Q Meisel, recent graduates of Salford and Aberdeen, respectively. Hi there. Thanks for joining me.
Hello.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
So people who have watched this channel before may well remember when Ren came on and showed us a whole parade of mobile phones. That was a good episode. I'll leave a link in the description for that. That was good. I always think we should do that again sometime.
Definitely.
Force you into your storage compartment and risking
What
life.
other wonders can we find?
Exactly.
But I guess, you know, in a sense, communication's the name of the game. We're going to talk about Starlink today. But both of you did a final year project based on communications. And just generally, it's kind of my background as well. So I thought it might be nice just to chat and talk about what you did, not only with final year project, but of course, what you're continuing to do now. So Ren, what were you looking to do in your final year project?
So it took a variety of forms, went through a load of kind of iterations of what I was going to do. But in the end, I came to the decision that I wanted to deploy something bare metal, hands-on, that I could see kind of the end-to-end of. So initially, I was going to look at a kind of multipath WAN router, but the connections I had kind of fell through with that. But it turned out I ended up deploying a streaming service hosted on bare metal in a data center in Leeds. And as part of that, I looked at the kind of different ways of getting video uplink and the latency between that and the different speeds and kind of how that all ties in together to get video from A to B, really, which is basically what the media industry is.
So you focused on kind of latency, or was it really about the whole streaming service?
It was a bit of both. I wanted something where, you know, traditional streaming services, a la, you know, YouTube, Twitch, and even Vimeo, are relatively opaque about what they do beyond when the stream arrives. You just get a yep, good, or no, it doesn't work. So I wanted to deploy something that I could take from end to end and I controlled every aspect of it. So that also meant that I could reduce the latency by removing all the unnecessary bits in the middle.
You've been able to come up with a website which is still working, which is, I think it's nice to do a project and have something like at the end rather than just a document.
Yes, it's on as long as Q lets me keep it in a colo in Leeds.
Yes.
But it's based off an initial project by one of our friends, Laura, who kind of did this. I think she said she was bored in lockdown and threw something out. And then I took the source, kind of updated it, brought it to 2024 kind of standards, and then deployed it myself, which was not an easy task. Some of it was a bit of...
We spent a solid week on this, just trying to get it to compile.
We did. There were lots of little dependencies that weren't documented, and in the end, it ended up taking a lot longer than I thought it would, but I'm pleased with the final result. And yeah, it does RTMP streams, MPEG dash, and HLS as well. And it has...
As outputs.
Yeah, and you can throw almost anything you want at it, and it will deal with resolution. I think I tested it up to something stupid like 16K before it fell over, but I just kind of kept throwing media at it to try and break it, as you do. And other than issues that were not mine, and further up the routing chain or the actual uplink fell over, it's been pretty solid.
Cool. Now we got stats as well. I like the pop up that tells you what bit rate it's working at and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. It means you can kind of see what it's doing, and it effectively all it is it's trying to be as transparent as possible to not let anything get in the way. And our business idea behind it was that actually the web page is just a front end. It's just kind of something to show for it. But my envisioning was that you would embed this somewhere. So you wouldn't necessarily use that site. You'd have that as the back end that you embed in like an iframe or just in a site.
And Q, what did you get up to in your final year?
So mine was prompted again by some media things. The University of Aberdeen being an oil town, have a lot of connections to oil companies, and a lot of research work there happens for
Hmm.
oil companies. And the kind of problem that came across not necessarily my desk, but my supervisor's desk, and was then handed off to me, was Netflix on oil rigs is slow and low quality. We need to do something about this. The workers are sacked. They can't watch their Netflix shows.
Hmm.
Oh no.
And so part of the problem that causes this, that was the research project was trying to solve the more technical problems at quite deep levels in the protocols, is that oil rigs are usually uplinked to the internet via geostationary satellite. So something way, way, way out in space, where it takes multiple seconds to get a message there and back down to Earth.
Yeah.
Which is great because it means you can get connectivity anywhere, especially the middle of the ocean. And they can be very high throughput, but it takes 2 seconds to start receiving data. And by that point, a lot of computers give up. They're like, well, the other side hasn't replied, so the internet must be broken, even though it's working totally fine. It's just not your home broadband connection. And
Yep.
Netflix and YouTube and whatever you would like to watch your content on are generally optimized for a home broadband connection, because that's or a mobile phone on 4G, 5G, because that's what everyone has.
Yep.
So the challenge that had been set to me was to come up with modification or a protocol or another layer to make this data transfer go at the speed that it should over this different kind of connection.
And that's where Quick came in.
Yes. So the latest and greatest on the internet is Quick. TCP has been around since 1982, if I remember my references correctly, sometime over 40 years ago. So it is old. It is getting into its middle ages. But that means it wasn't really designed for the internet of today. It's held up surprisingly well for a protocol that was designed 40 years ago in an academic institution. But the people have realized that it has its flaws and decided maybe we should make something a bit newer. So Quick is the evolution of this. It has security by default. Security wasn't really such a thing 40 years ago. And it has loads of features which make it really useful for the modern internet. Most of these features are extremely technical in nature, and I'd be here for hours if I tried to explain them all. But the project then focused on Quick rather than TCP, because one of the problems with extending TCP is it's so old, everyone thinks it still works how it did 40 years ago. So it's very difficult to extend it or change it or send something different, because then things along the path, like routers along the way, will go, well, I don't know what this is, and refuse to forward it. Whereas Quick is designed in a way that no one along the path can actually see what's going on inside, so you can do whatever you want inside.
So was the idea to use Quick and Starlink to speed up, or was that just testing?
The Starlink was mostly just testing for this. So the oil rigs don't use Starlink because one of the things you can't do with Starlink is have pre-allocated, pre-bought capacity. You can't say, I need a constant 100 megs a second at this location all the time.
Right.
This oil rigs need that for safety critical things, because if you can get out maybe if you only have the megabit a second that you are guaranteed, but that megabit a second might be enough to get out the message of help, we're on fire, or something like that. So this was the focus of this project. Wasn't the end result wasn't going to be used on Starlink, but of course a full satellite connection like that can get rather expensive and budgets aren't infinite. So Starlink was a very useful middle ground to test things with.
Okay. So Ren, how did you first start using Starlink?
Well, it was, and I think Q will agree here, the fact that two undergraduate students for realistically, over the course of our project, 200 quid, have a low Earth orbit satellite connection to play with is quite incredible. Like the fact that we can just order something, it arrives and set it up, and it's been mostly set it and forget it. And I started playing around with it because I was like, wait, well, if you look at uplinks now in the real world for media, they're going to send you out with a live view or a Starlink. And that's a lot of the uplink capacity now. You know, the traditional microwave links are still there, but they're getting less and less. So it was more kind of, how can I test this platform that I've made over as many different connectivity types as I can in the time I have. And a bit like Q, the final project doesn't have a whole lot to do with Starlink, but it's a great thing to say, oh, I've tested it and it works, that kind of thing.
Got a photo here of you at Glastonbury, proudly with Q's mounting the Starlink. So how did that work out?
So yeah, that was one where I have worked at Glastonbury for a few years, dealing with the joke is the wrong kind of traffic, vehicle traffic, not network traffic, in event control. So dealing with on-site traffic, which is all the vehicles within the perimeter. But the main thing there is 205,000 people in a field. Any extra capacity there is just you could put all as much in as you like. It's still going to fall over. And there was a space, and I invited Q along, and she was like, "Oh, I'll bring Starlink with me." So you don't need that, but actually, I will hold my hand up and say I was wrong there. That was one that we actually made quite a lot of use of it.
Yeah, so I was mostly like, oh, I have this new shiny toy and I'm going camping. I should take it with me. It's like it's supposed to be used for this. I didn't really have a plan as to what I was going to do with it. Just had a thing sitting on the shelf and thought, oh, this is a great time to play with it. The mobile network was fine during like setup, but then when 200,000 people arrived after we'd arrived, a few days after we'd arrived, the mobile network just couldn't handle it. Maybe you could get a text message through. It was not great, and in spite of how much effort mobile networks put in, it still doesn't work every year. And this is, you're probably familiar with this experience if you've ever been to a festival. The mobile network is somewhere between, oh, maybe you can load Google and not at all. Like you're not watching a video on the mobile network there. There's just too many people in the field. So it was very useful for us when, in our little camping area, because we were working at the festival, so we had internet at the where we were working provided. Although I'll get onto that because that broke a bit. But then in our camping area in the evening, when we were trying to get to sleep and enjoy ourselves, it was nice to have a fairly performant, like several hundred megabits a second internet connection, and catch up on life that we'd been ignoring all day whilst working. But then also the communications provider, who shall remain nameless to protect the guilty for Glastonbury, didn't do the best of jobs with their internet service. So doing work without internet was a bit difficult because it sometimes broke. So I think about 2 days in, I took the Starlink from my tent up to vent control where I was working and shared the Wi-Fi password around there. So it was actually being used by about 20 people in the room to get their jobs done and make the festival run.
And what was very interesting is this year there were they how do I put it? They had been breeding. There was quite a lot of Starlinks around and a few around event control because and I think a really interesting point to make is that although it was fast, we did see a slowdown in speed when more people were there because obviously there was more handsets, but we were still getting, what was it, a consistent 100 down and probably 20, 25 up?
Yeah, so when we arrived, it was just us. So we got about like 100 up and 350 down. But then, after, it was mostly the ice cream vans, but they all had Starlink on the roof, which then means the capacity is allocated. They do dynamic allocation of capacity. As I was saying earlier, you can't say, oh, I need 100 meg now.
Sure.
So it meant our speeds went down, but it still, like, 100 meg internet connection is nothing to scoff at. That's about what I have at my house, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I was going to ask whether you thought that, in future years, just like mobile gets bogged down, whether there'll be enough people using Starlink to make that slow. But I presume that there aren't that many people running
Well, yeah,
in camp.
I'm
So I don't
sure
know.
there is some theoretical limit on how many Starlink dishes can be in one area, but I don't know what it is. And
Yeah,
I think
and
it would be very expensive to hit that limit. Although
it
200,000
would.
people divided by maybe 1% of them have a Starlink would probably quite easily kill it.
Although year on year, having done a bit of the festival season this year, there are a lot more. They are kind of proliferating, especially for payments. Because if you can't take payments and you're down, for a day at a festival, that could easily be a few thousand. So 400 for some Starlink hardware and 85 a month for the roaming,
Yep.
including VAT. So not 20% off if you're VAT registered. That's quite a good deal.
There is Starlink for enterprise, isn't there? There's Starlink for RVs, and there's general Starlink. What do you know about the different types?
So the general Starlink, like the one if you just buy Starlink, you get the like standard dish, which will get you 100 to 300 megabits a second, depending on what other people are doing. You can buy priority data for that, so your stuff will go up before anyone else around you, but that gets pretty relatively expensive. But if you don't particularly care and just want whatever speed is available, you can buy the standard hardware for about 400, pay about 75 a month to use it at one location, or 85 a month to use it anywhere in, I think, Europe it's restricted to, and I think it's 95 a month if you want it anywhere in the world. But again, these are like fairly reasonable prices for an internet connection. That's only about double what my home internet costs me. There's also then the Starlink high performance dish, which you get with like Starlink Business. This can theoretically hit like a gigabit, although really hitting that is mostly theoretical. But it's a physically larger dish, so it can pick up a weaker signal and send data faster. Because if you have a weaker signal, then you need to if you have a smaller dish with a weaker signal, you'll struggle to pick up what the satellite is saying, and you might need to say it slower or repeat things. Like if you're having a conversation with someone and they can't really hear you, you might have to say things a bit slower or repeat what you've said to get the message across. So having a physically larger dish just means that less of that happens, and you can cram more data into the same airspace, and then obviously go faster. They also have flat mount ones to go on the top of an RV, which I think also comes in a standard and high performance version. I haven't particularly looked into those because those are relatively new products, and I haven't had time to research them yet. When I was working on Starlink, the only thing that was really available was the standard dish and the high performance dish. With the flat mount ones mostly differ from the standard dishes in that they don't have alignment motors in them. So the standard dish, you just put it on the ground, and then it uses GPS to figure out where it is and where the satellites are, and then points itself at the best view of the sky to see a satellite. Whereas the flat mount ones, it's up to you to point it in the right way. And if it's pointing like north instead of south, they prefer to point south because that's where most satellites are. If it's pointing north, then you'll get slower speeds, but it means you can permanently mount it on the roof of a van or something.
What's the hardware like, Ren, and how much can we use it and integrate it into our own networks?
Yeah, it certainly has its nuances. You have to kind of, as with any bit of hardware, but this one especially, you have to know how to kind of play with it. And it comes to simple things like, you've got to make sure you've got a clear view of the sky. And that's one where you kind of have to go on a bit of an adventure to find, a decent clear view of the sky. And sometimes where you think you've got a clear view, you haven't. And other things like the router that it comes with out the box uses standard 192.168.1 .0/24. So, and you can't change that. So it allocates you a local IP address, and that's it. You can't change that. You can't edit that, which if you're bridging two networks together and they're the same IP range, then you're going to have a bit of trouble. But you can bypass that, and I bypassed it on mine because I got the adapter. I know that Q actually cut and spliced hers. But the picture you can see is us in Berlin finding a clear view of the sky. And I've done much similar, digging through bushes and through kind of, because you get a very long cable. I think it's 25 meters.
I think,
I think.
yeah, 25
So,
meters is the standard. I think you can buy up to 150 meters, and after 150, they say like the signal's too degraded.
It looks like you're just about to shimmy up the tree.
Yeah, I was actually just putting it behind the tree because that had a clear view clear view towards the south.
But yeah, the hardware has its nuances, but you can bypass the router. You can either bypass it entirely, like Q's done, or I've got mine where it's in bypass mode. And then you get that, and you will get a /56 of V6, so you get IPv4 and IPv6 out of it, and they pair with Link. No, is it Links? Links in London.
Links Lon 1.
London Internet Exchange. Yeah, so it is still geographic because you have to think of, it's hitting the ground station. I believe all the ground stations are in the US. Oh,
no.
Oh, yes. Well, I think
one in most countries.
Yeah. So the Starlink down stations, then the actual end-to-end latency isn't awful.
So when you say it's geographic, you're talking about like where when it comes down into the terrestrial network.
Yeah.
If that's the other side of the world, then that's not helpful.
Yes. So you still have to take care of where the data is going after it's left Starlink's network. You can peer with them locally and make sure the data gets to your network as fast as possible, or with the least latency as possible. And then, then all you have to contend with is the satellite side of the link, and you have very little on the terrestrial side that you need to care about. But if you're just trying to send it to a random IP address somewhere in the world, chances are Starlink's ground station won't be physically very close to where that is. So then you actually have to care about the terrestrial side of the connection as well.
And if you peer with them with Starlink in London, do you know that your data will come out in London?
Good question.
Good question.
They're not very open about this. They like to imply that this is the case, but I think there is always the possibility that it comes down to a ground station which isn't connected to where you're peering with them, and then it goes over the open internet. So I think it's a test on a case-by-case basis. I'm relatively confident in saying that anywhere in the UK, it will go through the London peering. But if you start going to different countries, then you will need to test to see actually where the traffic ends up and how you can traffic engineer to get it to where you want it.
You talked about an adapter, Ren. Is there a healthy market for modifications?
Yeah, Starlink made or SpaceX made some interesting hardware choices. The Gen 1 dish was entirely powered by PoE, Power over Ethernet, and you could just get an Ethernet out the bottom and great. Whereas the Gen 2 dish, for some reason, they decided that you didn't need an Ethernet port and that Wi-Fi would be sufficient. And they use the mini HDMI connector to send Ethernet over at 52 volts?
It's 56 volts, slightly non-standard power over Ethernet. They made their own standard because, of course, why use a standard that already exists when you can make your own one that's subtly different in weird and annoying ways?
Yeah. So I bought the first party adapter for, I think it was 30 quid, but Q, you spliced yours. Yeah.
So the Starlink router, they call it a router, but it's not really a router. It's a Wi-Fi access point, is the power supply and Wi-Fi AP. The cable from it to the dish is just an Ethernet cable with a weird connector on the end. But the the Starlink router needs 230 volts in. And if you're, out in the field, you might not have 230 volts. You might only have like your car battery to run it off. And even though the dish itself only runs on 56 volts, it needs 230 volts in AC and then rectifies it down, which is quite a wasteful process. It generates a lot of heat. You also don't need the Wi-Fi access point at all because the actual router part is in the dish itself. If you could just plug the Ethernet straight into your laptop, you would just get a direct connection to the internet effectively. So what I did, and there are better ways to do this now, but this was what was available at the time, was to just chop the cable in half and wire a normal Ethernet port, jack even, onto the end. And then you can just use that as a normal Ethernet connection if you put the right voltages on the right pins to power the dish. There are now packages which do this and do the powering without you having to cut and splice any cables. So you're not destroying what is honestly a quite expensive cable because it has these weird connectors on the end. But then what I bought was this piece of hardware from a random guy in Canada called a Dishy Julie. It took a while to ship, but to his credit, works really well. But it is just one guy building them in his shed. So that's about the quality you're getting. But it does its job excellently. One port goes in the cable from the Starlink that you've spliced, and the other port is a normal Ethernet cable or Ethernet socket. And then inside it has all the power conversion electronics for running off anywhere from I think about 10 volts to 36 volts. So basically car battery voltage or solar panel voltage or common low voltage DC. And then steps it to the right voltage for the dish.
Yeah.
And interesting thing I tried with this, and I was amazed that it worked, is USB-C connectors, they can do fast charging. Most of that happens by running at higher voltages. So a standard USB-C connection is volts, but a fast charge connection might be 12 or 20 volts. So I got a little board that told my power bank, like just the one I have in my bag, to output 20 volts, and then wired it into this Dishy Julie and then the Starlink. And the Starlink booted and made a connection. So you can absolutely run the dish off the fast charge power bank if you have one with enough voltage output.
That's nice. It's it shows that it's ideal for being on the road. Yeah. I know that some sporting events have gone to air via Starlink. It's a viable option often for outside broadcasts, even though it's not without its issues, and anything like RIST or SRT going on top will help make sure that the drops aren't there. But how does it perform? Obviously it's always having to hand off from one satellite to the next quite frequently. Is that something that is noticeable?
So for general internet usage, like watching YouTube, browsing, social media, whatever, the things that they've kind of designed it as a replacement for a home broadband connection. So the things you would normally do on your home internet connection, whatever you get up to in your free time, you don't really notice it's a satellite. It's just an internet connection. It works totally fine. If you're actually caring about latency and bandwidth, then yes, it is noticeable. So I think you have an article I sent from APNIC, which is a very technical analysis of it. But I think figure 3 in it has the latency of a Starlink. So scroll down. So there you can see roughly you can see it's quite blocky in the latency. So there's obviously a lot of variation in the latency. You'd expect this from an internet connection. It's never going to be almost perfectly flat, especially when there's space involved. But then you can see about every 15 seconds, there's a big jump and it moves up to another block. And that 15 seconds is it moving to a new satellite. So Starlink have put like tens of thousands of these satellites up in orbit. So it can always, every 15 seconds, it can switch to a better satellite. But, those will be they all have slightly different paths back down to Earth. So you'll get slight variations in the latency,
Yep.
and sometimes something will block it. Like you see, there's one hang up there which is 140 milliseconds. 140 milliseconds is like 4 frames in TV, so it's not great. But most of the time, it's in the 20 to 60 millisecond range, which is, as long as you account for it, absolutely fine. But you do have to be aware that the latency is very much variable and will be constantly jumping around. And along with this, every 15 seconds, the bandwidth changes. So be
Yes,
conservative
ask
about
about
how
that.
much bandwidth you're using, because it will probably change in 10 seconds.
Yeah, and so if you say Glastonbury, you were down to 20 megabits up. If you're actually trying to transmit a TV show, you might want to be operating at 20 megabits. So you might actually find you're hitting the limits.
But if you're just doing like 1080p 50 or something, then you only probably need about 5 megabits to be safe. So that's fine. But if you're going above 1080p and everything in broadcast is like 4K, 8K even sometimes, then you will start to run in. You'll run into maybe this bandwidth isn't available. But if you have the money to do like 4K OB, you probably have the money to buy the high performance dish, which will probably be able to handle the 4K upload.
And towards the end here, you can see the packet loss is almost coincident with the changes. Certainly these seem to be kind of roughly on the borders, but overall for 375 seconds, it's not that bad in terms of packet loss.
It's a fairly reliable internet connection. Like, it generally gets stuff through or doesn't at all. It just might take a bit more time than you're expecting to get it through, but it will get through eventually.
Yeah, and that level of packet loss and also variation, that's something that both FEC can handle, or any of the RIST style protocols. And
I think that packet loss at the end there is like 0.1%, which is absolutely normal packet loss, and any sensible protocol can deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Or is it loss times 10? I think it depends really if obviously if they're in consecutive blocks, which I assume they probably are.
It is a bit of a consecutive, because when it's moving from one satellite to the other, it loses connectivity for a fraction of a second whilst it's changing which satellite it's talking to. And if you're really latency aware, then that can result in what appear to be dropped packets when in fact they're just buffered.
Yeah, well, the whole thing needs a bit of a buffer on the decoder side for live video, but as long as you account for that.
If you put like a second buffer on the decoder, then you'll probably be fine.
This is a zoom in, I guess.
You can see more clearly the like sharp block change every 15 seconds.
Yeah, and also where it's losing the packets.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'll put the link to this website and webpage in the description, and just you have a look through. So I think that overall, if you kind of take the time to tune your system to allow for Starlink to be part of it, you can have it be low latency and fairly reliable. But as with any connectivity, the days that it doesn't work are always going to happen at some point.
Yeah, always have a backup, and then a backup for the backup.
The thing about it is it's so easily accessible that if you're not sure, you can just either rent. You can rent a dish from them. Like, it's the kind of thing that if you're not sure if it'll work in your workflow, there's ways to get hold of them, and realistically, you're not out a whole lot. And as me and Q have found out, it's a very neat little thing to have, even if you're not looking to even uplink with it. But if you're in a slightly remote area, then it's definitely one to look into, and it's so accessible.
There are other systems available like OneWeb, perhaps they're less easy to get into because
they're very much less accessible. Those are, you need a sales call, which can put a lot of people off, especially just trying it out.
Indeed.
Yes.
Look, thanks for sharing your experiences, hacking around and trying things out. I think that there's a lot to be learned. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks
for being on Q, and thanks, Ren. Appreciate your time.